Part 1.
You will hear a woman talking to a wedding planner about her wedding. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Good morning. This is Your Day Wedding Planners. How can I help you? Hello. Yes, my name is Amanda Lumsden, and I've recently got engaged. I'd like to start arranging my wedding, and I'm looking for a wedding planner. How lovely that you are getting married. It's a very big day that should be enjoyed without any stress. You are very wise to be looking for a wedding planner. May I ask when you are wanting to have the wedding? We are looking at next July on a Saturday. I think having it on a weekend is the best idea, so that people can travel more easily, and if we had it on a Sunday, people wouldn't have time to recover, would they? Yes, the whole system is pretty much set up for Saturday weddings. Everything gets much more expensive if you want to have a wedding on a Sunday because of the extra staff costs of working on Sundays. What kind of wedding do you envision? For example, where would you like the wedding to be? We want to get married here in London. It makes it much easier for everyone. Country weddings are lovely, but there is so much involved with travel and accommodation. I'm from here myself, and my fiancé comes from Scotland. It will be easier if they can just all come directly here. And we'd like a church wedding, but I must confess neither of us is very religious. I just think getting married in a garden isn't very romantic. We could easily organise that for you. The important thing is to set a date. July is wedding season and reception venues book out quite quickly. Have you thought about how many people would be coming? I made a quick list last night, and if all the Edinburgh relatives are able to come, we are looking at about 80 people, I think. That's if no children are invited. Then it would be over 100, so I really don't want to invite any at all. That's a pretty standard size. What you should do is come into our studio so we can discuss your requirements. Would you like to make an appointment?
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
Can you give me an idea of how much your services cost? I really don't want to waste your time if I can't afford you. Certainly, we have 2 types of service. You can either have me just as a wedding consultant, where I give you ideas and contacts, but you have to do the actual legwork, like making the bookings, arrangements, and payments. For example, I could advise you on where it should be held and give you lists of things that need to be done, and give you the best contacts for flowers and the wedding cake and rings, etc. That's 3 hours with me in my studio, and it costs £600. Or I do a complete service as a wedding planner where we arrange and organise everything, and our rate is 15% of costs. For example, if what we arrange for your wedding costs £20,000, which is a low average for a church wedding with a 3-course sit-down reception in London, we would add another £3,000 for our fee. Oh, I definitely prefer the second option. I really just want to leave everything up to you. Both of us have very time-consuming jobs in banking, and we just don't have the time to become involved. I'd just like to get some idea of the sort of weddings you've done in the past, just to make sure we are on the same page. If I like what I see, I'll just give you a free hand. You sound like the dream bride. I can give you references too if you like, people you can talk to who have used my services in the past. I could give you as many names as you like. In any case, let's make an appointment so you can come to my studio for a chat. Would Wednesday afternoon suit you, say around 4 p.m? It would be best if I came in my lunch hour. Could I come on Wednesday at 12:30? That's perfect. Do you have our address? Yes, it's 25 Brompton Road. Is that right? Great. We'll see you on Wednesday then. Goodbye.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear a radio program in which the presenter is interviewing Sally Jenkins, the coordinator of a local allotment garden. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
For the last couple of years, Sally Jenkins has been managing an allotment in her town of Springvale. There is a lot of excitement about how you are managing the space. How is it different?
As you know, an allotment is a piece of public land that is broken into small patches of land or allotments for citizens who don't have gardens to be able to grow flowers and food for their own use. When I took over managing this one, it was quite a mess. Only about 20% of the spaces were being used regularly and looking good, while the rest of them were quite barren.
Why was that, do you think?
When I did a phone around to all the allotment owners, I found that the ones who were failing felt terribly guilty because they had taken the space, but then rarely found the time for its upkeep. So I decided to change the way things were managed a bit. I called a meeting of all the allotment holders so we could get together to discuss how we could make the space more workable for everyone. The people who were actively using their space had the option to continue as they were. Most people had originally taken the allotment because they wanted homegrown fruits and vegetables, but they were failing because they were inexperienced gardeners and really did not know what they were doing. The meeting was a great success. No one wanted to give up their plot, though, so we needed to think of ways that the whole space could work better for everyone. We all decided to hold more meetings in the future to exchange ideas. I knew that the key would be to get those who knew what they were doing to get behind the others.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
What was decided to improve the allotment?
Firstly, we talked about the type of produce that everyone wanted to grow. The most popular was summer tomatoes, but the main complaint was that they took a lot of maintenance and water and were easily infested with insects. So it was decided that anyone growing tomatoes would also grow them with borage and marigolds, two flowering plants which seem to repel pests. The allotment is organic, so no pesticides are allowed. The watering problem was solved by getting a council grant to install drip irrigation systems in every allotment. This was a major change, which meant people were able to go on holiday and miss some weekends of gardening without risking death for their plants in the hotter months. Another thing that people discussed was that often if they grew something, they would have a glut of one vegetable, such as courgettes, melons or pumpkins, and be unable to consume them all. Most of the group decided to pool their resources and only plant one or two types of plants each, and then share their crops. This way, everybody got access to a much wider variety of produce all year. Some people who already had successful allotments and spent a lot of time in them didn't want to change what they were doing, and that was fair enough. These were generally our experts in the allotment anyway. Their plots were successful because they spent a lot of time in them, and they had a great deal of experience and knowledge. These people have turned out to be a fantastic resource for teaching those who have spent less time gardening. Most of the plots had hardened, derelict compost heaps taking up a lot of space. One of the gardeners confessed that the thing he loved most about having an allotment was creating compost. He offered to transform his complete plot into a large compost heap to be accessible to everyone. This has been a huge success, and all the allotment tenants bringing him their vegetable peelings and food waste regularly has meant they visit the allotment more often. We have, and I do not hesitate to boast, the richest, most worm-filled compost resource in the country. Doing it collectively like this has given all the gardeners more space in their own lots to grow things. The allotment is looking wonderful these days, and what has been produced in the last couple of years has been astounding. By working more communally, the gardeners have brought so much food to their tables. But most of all, the great feeling of community that this has fostered has been very heartwarming.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You hear a communications student talking to his tutor about a creative writing project he is doing. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
So, Ian, for your course mini-thesis this year, you are presenting a novel. Is that correct? I understand you have already been working on it for a number of years, and one of the main reasons you took this creative writing module was to get it finished.
Well, not necessarily. The reason I started doing a communications degree is because I've always wanted to be a professional writer. 4 Booker Prize winners are graduates of this course. I knew I could learn the correct techniques for fiction writing at this university.
Yes, you have come to the right place. Now, I know you have been doing readings of some of your chapters in the group tutorials. How has that been for you?
Pretty brutal. The other students aren't afraid to say exactly what they think. Though I must say, even though the feedback has been tough at times, it has all been constructive. And I have given back some of my thoughts on other students' work too. I find the reading sessions so rewarding. Writing is such a solitary business, and finding readers is never easy. Having listeners is such a great experience.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
There has been some criticism of your work that it doesn't have enough structure. What kind of novel would you say it is?
Most of the other students are writing crime novels and thrillers which need to have a specific formula for the structure. However, I'm writing an account that is loosely based on my great-grandfather's life, as it is a mainly character-based psychological study. It's not easy to follow the typical plot path, as nothing really dramatic happens.
I understand, but you have to make use of some of the traditional forms if you want to retain a reader's attention, whether you are writing literary or genre fiction. Can you tell me what these are?
There is the classic 5-stage plot structure: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. I know I can't deviate from that, as my story is more character-driven though. I like to think of it more as the onion-peeling type of exposition. The story goes backward in time a lot, so we can see the motivation behind the character's behavior and personality.
I see. It's written in the first person. Don't you find this to be constraining?
It does slow down the action, and that's probably where the structural problem is. But I like the very subjective, one-sided reveals. The reader needs to work harder, I suppose, to understand the real truth behind the character. That's why I make use of flashback to solve the problem of exposing his past.
I think the flashbacks are a little long. Generally, writers use them to expose just one factor at a time. Perhaps you could tighten them up a bit. What proportion of the text are they at the moment?
About half, I suppose. Do you really suggest I shorten them?
Perhaps you could have an omnipresent narrator present them. Then the difference between the time periods would be much clearer, and you could avoid lengthy time and place setups and descriptions.
That is an interesting idea. A narrator that can see all can describe situations much more efficiently. I wonder why I hadn't thought of that myself.
It's not easy to take a step back from your work and look at it objectively. That's what the group readings are for. The only downside is you can't read the whole novel aloud, so flaws in structure are not so obvious. I think your style is excellent. From what I've read, I can see you do have talent.
Thank you. It's heartening to get some positive feedback sometimes.
What would you say is the midpoint of the novel? The place where some sweeping change comes in?
I don't think I'm there yet. I suppose it will be when he meets his wife. She is the factor that leads him to changing his view of the world.
How far off this point are you? What I suggest is that you start writing that chapter now. I think you need a starting point to resolving the story.
You mean jump ahead? I don't want readers finding mistakes in my chronology. I've only written it in chapter order so far. That way, I can be sure to remember what order I've introduced certain information. It's hard to keep track of everything.
Give it a try, just an exercise. I suggest you write the last few pages as well. It'll give you a better feeling for the action. Send me something in an email when you've written it, and we can talk about it again in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you. This has been really useful.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear a part of a lecture about bees. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 36. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 36.
Western honeybees are the bees used for commercial honey throughout the world, and their existence relies on a tight bond and cooperation between all the bees in the hive. In every honeybee hive, there are 3 types of bees: the queen, worker bees, and drones. Queen bees have the sole purpose of laying eggs for the colony. There is only one in every hive, and they can live for up to 5 years. The majority of the colony is made up of female, non-reproducing worker bees. They do different jobs depending on their age, and their life cycle is short. From the age of 12 to 17 days, they work inside the hive, looking after eggs and larvae, storing nectar and pollen, feeding the queen, and building the hive itself from wax produced from their pores. From 18 to 21 days, they guard the hive, and at 22 to 42 days, they forage for food. Drones, which are male bees, whose only job is to mate with queens from other colonies, make up about 15% of the population. They are smaller than the queen, but larger than workers. They cannot make wax and are unable to collect pollen or nectar. They do not even have a sting. To ensure genetic diversity, drones do not mate with their own queen. If, during their lifetime, a new queen from another hive is in search of mates, they are called into action. Otherwise, they are of no practical use to the hive. They are even fed by worker bees. They are expelled from the colony in the autumn, so their lifespan is some weeks to a few months, depending on when they are born during the year. The 2 types of food bees require are honey made from the sugary nectar of flowers and small grains of pollen from the anthers of flowers. Pollen provides a wide range of nutrients including protein, carbohydrates, lipids, vitamins, and minerals. Most bees collect either pollen or nectar, but some carry both at the same time. The pollen is stored in receptacles on their hind legs called corbiculae, and a bee can carry half her weight in pollen. Nectar is ingested into the forager bee's honey stomach, which contains a digestive enzyme called invertase. If hungry, she opens a valve in the nectar stomach, and a portion of the nectar passes through to her own stomach to be converted to energy for her own needs. Invertase splits the nectar sucrose into fructose and glucose. When they return to the hive, they regurgitate the nectar into the cells of the honeycomb or deliver it to one of the worker bees, who passes it mouth to mouth with other bees until its moisture content is reduced. The worker bees in the hive repeatedly ingest and regurgitate the nectar, adding more invertase, continuing to break the nectar down. Once the honey is placed in honeycomb cells, they are capped with beeswax by the worker bees. Pollen is mixed with nectar to make a substance called bee bread, which is rich in protein and is fed to the larvae.
Before you hear the rest of the lecture, you have some time to look at questions 37 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 37 to 40.
The queen is the center of the hive and the center of any swarm of bees. She is the largest bee, with an elongated abdomen which she places over the center of the cells to deposit her eggs in the honeycomb. A queen mates only once in her life and stores the sperm she collects in her spermatheca, an organ in her abdomen which is used for fertilizing her eggs. Over the years, the queen runs out of the genetic material she has collected, but she does not mate again. When the queen dies or becomes infertile, chosen larvae in the cells are exclusively fed royal jelly, which somehow has the effect of creating new queens. Royal jelly is a honeybee secretion from the glands in the hypopharynx of worker bees that is used to feed all larvae, but normal larvae are also fed bee bread. The first queen larva to emerge kills all other queens at their development stage. She goes out looking for mates on the 6th day of emerging and mates with 10 to 15 drones from other hives. After mating, the young queen returns to the hive and for the rest of her life is surrounded by worker bees who feed and groom her, while she lays eggs day and night, up to one every minute.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.